Hello, this is chapter 9 of Beau at Ballard Creek, and it is the airplane. Now no one in Ballard Creek or at the mine could talk of anything else but airplanes. All of the miners who lived out on the trail past the mine walked into town through the slush and mud, and they filled up at the roadhouse. No one knew when the airplane would come, but no one was going to miss it, so they'd stay as long as it took. Clarence hardly ever left the wireless cabin, waiting to hear when the plane would come. And there was always someone crowded into the little shack with him. 2 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days. It was a terribly long time to wait. Cannibal and Nels Nemi from the creek were in the wireless shack playing checkers with Clarence when the wire came. Nels and Cannibal ran out into the street, whooping and carrying on. They didn't even wait for Clarence to print it out. Everyone who was in town came running to hear what the wire said. Leaving Beatles at 3:45. Ballard Creek at 4:30. Cannibal saw Beau and shouted, "Go tell the boys! Go tell the boys!" Beau threw a troubled look over at Oscar. She wanted to go tell the boys, of course. She didn't want them to miss it, but she was afraid the plane would come while she was telling them. But then she turned and ran as fast as she could across the bridge and up to the mining camp. Beau ran so hard the bottom of her feet hurt from pounding on the ground. As soon as she yelled the news to Jack, she ran back across the bridge. Everyone in town was crowded down by the sandbar where the plane would land. Beau pushed through the grown-ups to get to the edge of the bank with Oscar and the other children. The children held hands and braced their feet to keep from being pushed into the water by the crowd behind them. "Quiet, quiet," the grown-ups kept telling everyone. It had to be quiet so they could listen for the plane. Beau was looking at the sky so hard she felt her eyes were bruised. It seemed like a very long time before they saw something way down the river high in the sky. "Looks like a dragonfly," said Oscar. The dragonfly got bigger and bigger, and then it looked like a small bird, and then like a raven, and then they could hear it. That made it real, that little sound. "Oh," said Beau, and clutched Oscar's hand. It sounded like the engine on the winch at the mine, or maybe more like Arvid's sewing machine. It got closer and closer, and then they could see 4 wings, and they could see 2 heads inside the plane, one in front and one in back. And then it was right over their heads, flying low over the town, up toward the roadhouse. Everyone left the riverbank to follow it, never taking their eyes off it for a minute. Beau's throat was sore from screeching. She tripped and fell because she wasn't watching where she was going. The plane tipped sideways and made a circle around the roadhouse, and everyone followed it. Around and around, stumbling and falling in the cold mud left from the melting snow. Everyone ran. Even the old men and the old women were running as if they were young again. They ran heads up, craning their necks, following the plane as if it had strings that were pulling them. To the back of the roadhouse, and then back to the front again, the plane circled with everyone following them. Beau fell again, and this time strong hands reached for her and swung her up. It was Arvid. He didn't take his eyes off the plane or stop running. He just set Beau all muddy and wet on his shoulders, the way he used to when she was little. "Gonna be trampled," was all he said. The roaring, racketing airplane suddenly came down lower, right towards the roadhouse, and everyone screamed, terrified. It was going to knock the roadhouse down. Then it missed the roadhouse, and it was coming right for them. Arvid was swearing fiercely in Swedish. From Arvid's shoulders, Beau saw old Nakaluk standing stock still in the path, her mouth open, but Beau couldn't hear her screaming over the sound of the engine plane. The plane circled once again, suddenly dipped a little to one side, and there it was. It landed on the sandbar. It happened so quickly that all the people around the roadhouse had run back down to the bank. Beau held her breath until the propeller in the front of the airplane stopped spinning, and that noise stopped. The 2 men in the plane climbed over the side. Bo shrank down on Arvid's shoulders, frightened because they didn't look like real people. The flyers had huge black eyes like dragonflies, but then they pulled their eyes off their faces and let them dangle around their necks. It's like snow goggles, Arvid told Bo. Keeps the wind out of their eyes. The flyers were laughing and waving at everyone. Bo was sure they'd had a good time scaring everyone. Watching them scream and run, they looked pleased with themselves like Sammy or the other big kids did when they jumped out at the little kids and scared them. Two of the old-timers, Jimmy the Pirate and Saul, waded through the water to get to the sandbar and were shaking the pirate's hand so hard Bo thought it looked like they were pumping water. Bo looked for Jack, and suddenly she was afraid he'd missed the airplane. There's a picture of the pilot. The pilot and the other men waded to the bank shaking hands all the way. And there was Lester and all the other men from the mine crowding around as well, but she didn't see Jack anywhere. Then she saw him, tall as a tree, standing by the roadhouse. Nakalak and her old husband, Ernesek, were hiding, peeking out from behind him. "Papa," she screamed, "did you see it? Did you see it?" Jack waved at her and put his arm around Nakalak and Yersek's shoulders and encouraged them along with him to the river bank. They still looked scared. Jack looked up at Bo on Arvid's shoulders. "I was wondering where you was in all of this hoorah," said Jack. "Wonder you kids wasn't run over with all this carrying on." The flyers couldn't stay long. They had to get right back to Nome where the weather was good. So after coffee and sandwiches at the roadhouse, they took off again. They dragged the airplane down to the end of the sandbar, and then they started the noisy engine, climbed in, pulled their goggles back over their eyes, and there it was, the black plane hurtling down the sandbar, rackety-rackety. They all watched and listened while it turned into a bird again, and then a dragonfly, and then they couldn't hear it anymore. That night there was a dance and a big party, noisier than the 4th of July and more joyful than Christmas. It seemed to Bo that no one in Ballard Creek would ever be able to go back to ordinary life again.